Is ego dissolution actually a thing? But before we go on, do not forget to like and subscribe. I'm trying to blow up. The ego dissolves. You've heard this 1,000 times. It's the defining feature of the psychedelic experience, right? Everyone talks about ego death, ego dissolution, ego dissolving into the cosmic unity of all things. It's in scientific papers. It's in therapy protocols. It's how researchers measure mystical experiences. There's literally a standardized questionnaire with items like, I experienced a dissolution of my normal sense of self, and my sense of being a separate self dissolved completely. But here's a question nobody seems to be asking. What if ego dissolution isn't actually a thing? What if we've been describing a genuine psychological phenomenon using completely the wrong framework? What if the concept itself, borrowed from a psychoanalyst who was wrong about almost everything, is leading us astray? Today, we're going to do something dangerous. We're going to question one of the most sacred concepts of the psychedelic discourse. And I'm going to show you that the actual evidence from trip reports, from neuroscience, from philosophy, suggests that whatever you're experiencing on high doses, it probably isn't ego dissolution. Let's start with a simple question. Where did this concept even come from? The answer: Sigmund Freud, and that should immediately make you suspicious. In the early 1900s, Freud proposed that the human psyche could be divided into three structures: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id was the primitive, unconscious drive, sex, aggression, pleasure-seeking, pure animal instinct. The superego was internalized rules, morality, cultural constraints, your parents' voice in your head telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And the ego was supposed to be you, the conscious self, the mediator between the id's desire and the superego's restrictions. The part that says, I want and I am. In Freud's model, the ego is the boundary between self and the world. It's what gives your sense of being a distinct individuality. It's the psychological structure that maintains your sense of identity. So when psychedelic researchers started to describe what happens on high doses, they reached for this framework: the ego dissolves. They said, the boundaries between self and the world break down. The sense of being a separate individual vanishes. And this became the standard description: ego dissolution, ego death, the dissolution of the ego boundary. It's in the mysticism literature from the 60s. It's in modern clinical research. It's how Rick Doblin talks about MDMA. It's how Roland Griffiths describes psilocybin mystical experiences. But here's the problem. Freud was wrong. And he was wrong about almost everything, including the ego. Let's be very clear about something. Modern psychology does not support Freudian theory at all. Freud's ideas about childhood sexual development? Wrong. His Oedipus complex? Wrong. Penis envy? Deeply wrong. His therapeutic techniques? Barely better than placebo and controlled studies. The unconscious exists. We know that now from cognitive neuroscience, but it doesn't work the way Freud thought. There's no seething cauldron of repressed sexual desires. There's no id trying to break through. The unconscious is mostly just automatic processing, implicit memory, and pattern recognition. And the ego? That's where it gets interesting. Modern neuroscience doesn't find evidence for a unified ego structure. There's no single brain region or network that corresponds to Freud's ego. What we find instead is a collection of processes distributed across multiple brain networks. There's the default mode network, midline structures that activate during self-referential thinking. When you think about yourself, your past, your future, the network lights up. Then there's a salience network, detecting what's relevant to you right now: pain, threats, rewards, anything personally significant. There's autobiographical memory, your sense of continuous identity over time, stored throughout the brain. Then there's bodily self-awareness, your sense of having a body, located in the insula and somatosensory cortex. There's narrative self, the stories you tell about who you are, involving language areas and prefrontal cortex. Then there's the minimal self, the basic sense of being a perspective, possibly involving brainstem and thalamic structures. All of these contribute to what we call self, but they're separate systems. They can disassociate from each other. They can be enhanced or suppressed independently. There's no unified ego that dissolves. There are multiple self-related processes that can be disrupted in different ways, but no overall dissolution. And if the concept of ego is fundamentally flawed, if it's a pre-scientific model that doesn't match with how the brain actually works, then building a psychedelic theory on ego dissolution is like building it on sand. We're using a term from a discredited 19th century psychoanalyst to describe 21st century neuropsychopharmacology. That's just not imprecise, that's actually misleading. Okay, but maybe the term is wrong, but the phenomena is real, right? Maybe people really do lose their sense of self. We're just using the wrong word for it. Let's actually look at what people report. Because when you've read trip reports carefully, and I've read a lot, they don't actually support the ego dissolution narrative. They contradict it. Start with DMT, the most intense psychedelic experience possible. If ego dissolution happens anywhere, then it should happen here. But what do people actually report? The entities were showing me things. I was terrified. They communicated to me. I felt more myself than I've ever felt. Wait, if your ego is dissolved, who is the me in these reports? Who's experiencing terror? Who's being communicated to? In a previous episode, we talked about DMT entities, people consistently describing being perceived by these entities, being addressed, having information communicated specifically to them. You can't have communication without a receiver. You can't feel terror without someone being terrified. The I doesn't go away on DMT. It becomes the focus of an overwhelming experience. Some users describe it as a hyper-individuation. The self doesn't dissolve, it becomes more intensely experienced than ever before. You're not losing yourself, you're becoming acutely, even painfully aware of being a conscious observer. But what about heroic doses of LSD or psilocybin? Ego dissolution happens, right? Read the trip reports. They're intensely personal and autobiographical. I saw my entire childhood unfold in front of me. I relived conversations with my father. I understood why I developed this fear. I saw patterns in my relationships. This isn't ego dissolution. This is autobiographical integration. Your sense of identity isn't dissolving, it's becoming reconstructed. You're experiencing memories, relationships, patterns, fears, desires, all deeply personal content. You might experience depersonalization, feeling detached from those memories, or derealization, feeling like they're not quite real, but that's not dissolution. That's altered self-processing while the self-content remains front and center. And here's a smoking gun against ego dissolution. Bad trips. If your ego is actually dissolved, you couldn't have a bad trip. Fear requires a self to be afraid. Anxiety requires someone to be anxious about something. That clawing panic of I'm dying or I'm going insane, that's a hyperactive self-preservation response, not ego dissolution. Bad trips are characterized by heightened self-concern. You become acutely, painfully aware of yourself as vulnerable, as mortal, as potentially damaged. The boundary between self and threat becomes more rigid, not more dissolved. People in bad trips don't report losing themselves. They report being trapped in themselves, locked in a prison of selfhood, unable to escape the painful awareness of being this particular person having this particular horrible experience. If ego dissolution was real, bad trips would be impossible. The fact that they're common, that they're characterized by intense self-concern is strong evidence that ego isn't going anywhere. Okay, well, what about those profound unity experiences, the oceanic boundlessness, the sense of oneness with everything? Read those reports carefully. I felt at one with the universe. I experienced unity with all things. The boundaries dissolve between me and everything else. Notice the pronouns I felt, I experienced, even describing unity. There's still a perspective, still someone doing the experiencing. You're experiencing a different relationship between self and the world. Maybe boundaries feel permeable, maybe you feel connected to everything, but the experiencing itself requires a subject. The unity experience happens to someone. Some traditions call this non-dual awareness. But even non-duality requires a perspective from which duality is absent. But wait, sometimes people don't remember parts of their trip. Doesn't that suggest ego dissolution? No, that's retrograde amnesia, memory formation failure. It's very common with high doses. Your brain's memory encoding system gets disrupted. You can't transfer experiences from short-term to long-term memory. But amnesia for an experience doesn't mean you didn't have a self during that experience. It means you can't remember it. These are completely different things. So if it's not ego dissolution, well then what is happening on high doses? Okay, let me propose several alternative frameworks, all more scientifically precise than ego dissolution. Default mode network disruption. We know psychedelics dramatically reduce the activity in the default mode network, that system responsible for self-referential thinking. But reducing DMN activity isn't ego dissolution. It's more like ego background noise reduction. Think about it. Your DMN is constantly chatting. What do I need today? Did I say something stupid yesterday? What if this goes wrong? That's not your ego, that's ruminative self-talk. Psychedelics quiet this chatter. You stop telling yourself stories about yourself. The narrative stops for a while, and that feels profound, maybe like you're losing yourself. But you're not losing yourself, you're losing the anxious, repetitive thinking about yourself. The self remains, the anxiety kind of goes away. And then there's altered sensory gating and predictive processing. Psychedelics disrupts your brain's predictive processing methods. Suddenly, everything becomes salient. Every sensation, every thought, every perception. Your usual distinction between me and not me is partially maintained by attention and predictive filtering. You pay attention to your body, your thoughts, and your concerns. External stimuli gets filtered unless they're relevant to you. Psychedelics breaks these filters. Everything becomes equally salient. The boundary isn't dissolving. The filtering mechanism that maintains the boundaries is disrupted. This can feel like merging with the environment. But maybe we just need a new framework. What if psychedelics don't dissolve normal consciousness, but it accesses a different mode of consciousness that our language isn't sophisticated enough to describe? Not ego dissolution, not ego presence, something orthogonal to that entire dimension. We're trying to describe a genuinely novel state using concepts from ordinary consciousness, like trying to describe a color to someone who's only ever seen black and white. The words don't fit because the state is fundamentally different. And also, let's talk about this. What if ego dissolution is partially a suggestion effect? You've been told that psychedelics dissolve your ego. You've read trip reports about ego death. You've heard researchers talk about it. You're primed to interpret your experience through this lens. So when you have an altered state, maybe reduced self-referential thinking, maybe your sensory system being overwhelmed, maybe depersonalization, your brain reaches for the available framework. Oh, this must be ego dissolution. The experience is genuine, the interpretation is influenced by expectation. And then your trip report reinforces the concept for the next person, creating a feedback loop. This doesn't mean the experiences aren't real or profound. It just means that the conceptual framework we use to understand them might be culturally constructed rather than reflecting the actual neurocognitive changes. So let's zoom out for a moment. The self is not a thing, it's a process. A collection of brain systems working together to create the illusion of a unified, continuous you. And illusion doesn't mean fake, it means constructed. Your sense of self is real, but it's a real construction, not a real thing. Psychedelics disrupt this construction in interesting ways. Some processes get enhanced, some get suppressed, some get decorrelated from each other. The usual relationships between self-processes change. But calling this ego dissolution, it implies a unified structure that dissolves. That's not what's happening. It's more like a temporary reconfiguration of self-processes. Maybe we need entirely new language. Instead of ego dissolution, maybe we can call it reduced self-referential processing, altered self-world boundary perception, depersonalization with preserved perspectives, autobiographical reconstruction with enhanced connectivity. But all of those don't sound as sexy as ego dissolution. Yet they're more precise, less poetic, sure, but precision matters when you're trying to understand the brain. The experiences described as ego dissolution, they're real, they're profound, often life-changing, therapeutically valuable. Understanding the mechanism doesn't diminish the meaning. Maybe you do experience a sense of unity. Maybe boundaries do feel permeable. Maybe you access states of consciousness that feel radically different from this ordinary state. These are genuine psychological phenomena worth investigating. But we need better concepts to understand them. Ego dissolution is a term borrowed from a flawed theoretical framework. It's imprecise, it's misleading, and it prevents us from understanding what's actually happening to the brain. And the irony? By clinging on to ego dissolution, we're letting Freud's ghost haunt psychedelic science. We're constraining our understanding to fit categories that were wrong from the start. It's time to let go of that framework. So is ego dissolution a thing? No, at least not in the way we've been thinking about it. It doesn't exist as a unified brain structure. Therefore, it can't be dissolved. The experiences are real, neurocognitive changes are real, but the framework we've been using to interpret them is borrowed from a discredited 19th century psychoanalyst. Let that dude go. And let's move on with the future of psychedelic science. And that is the end of the show. If you want to explore further concepts that haven't been addressed in this episode, then join my Patreon. Support the show. I hope you enjoy this episode of Your Drug on Brains. Like and subscribe if it challenged your thinking. Leave a comment, especially if you disagree. I read all of them, and I want to hear your perspective. Follow on X, TikTok, and Instagram, all at Tipado. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.